So little about me. I am a psychotherapist and a psychological therapy lead at ABL. And today I will cover some aspects of intuitive eating and how this approach can be implemented to our routines. And perhaps you will learn something new today about the whole approach. So just to give you a little bit of a heads up how the session will look like, I will talk for maybe less than 40 minutes. And at the end, we will have some time to answer any questions you might have. So please leave any questions in the Q&A box. So you're very welcome to drop a message or anything you wanted to say. And I will try to go over some of the questions at the end. So just to start with, I suppose the intuitive eating subject. So intuitive eating is a simple idea. It means that you make peace with all types of food. So unlike traditional diets that restrict or ban certain foods, intuitive eating requires you to stop looking at food as good or bad. So instead, you listen to your body and eat what feels right for you. So you might think that this means you just start to eat whatever you want, anytime you want. And that's not the case. So experts would say that intuitive eating means tapping into your body's natural ability to tell you when you're hungry or satisfied. So when you eat intuitively, you also let go of the idea that you need to lose weight or gain weight so you can look a certain way. This idea is to help you focus on foods that work best for you, and of course your overall physical as well as mental health. So bear with me. So aims of today's training, let's go back. Aims of today's training or today's webinar is to understand what intuitive eating is, who this is for, to understand benefits of intuitive eating, and perhaps, learn around the principles of it, as well as look at some misconceptions of intuitive eating. And of course, I will welcome some of the questions later on. So just to kind of tell you about what is intuitive eating altogether. And so intuitive eating, we know, is an evidence-based health approach created in around 1995 by two dietitians, Elise Resch and Evelyn Triboulet. If you take anything away from today's webinar that I'd like you to take away, so let it be that intuitive eating is not a diet. In fact, it is often referred to as an anti-diet. So no foods are off limits. There are no rules on when, what, or how much to eat. And this non-diet or anti-diet approach takes the focus away from judging success based on a number on the scale and places it on behaviors that promote health. And at its core, intuitive eating, going back to the way we were naturally born to eat. So it helps kind of involves for us to go back to the ways we were naturally born to obviously take food in. So when we were young, we ate when we were hungry and stopped when full, and something we innately felt by listening to our body cues. So we, of course, were not ever born to measure portions or track macros or count calories. And we did not pay attention to any extra forces telling us what we should or shouldn't be doing to be healthy or thin, as diet culture would have it. So the need to eat or stop eating was fully intuitive. So finding a way back to those internal cues is a large part of intuitive eating practice. It involves meeting both physical and, of course, psychological needs, because mental health, of course, is equally important, and only you know what you need at any given time. You have to look at yourself as an expert of your own body. So when we look at going back to the two dietitians, Resch and Triboulet, intuitive eating, and as according to them, intuitive eating is an empowerment tool, one you can use to escape from dieting cycle and weight obsession, to learn what it means and how it feels to truly be in touch with your body and heal your relationship with food. So if this sounds quite overwhelming, complicated, or simply not possible, that's okay. Intuitive eating is a practice. It takes time to break down all the diet rules and emotions you might want to hold on to. So think about how long you've been dieting for, or perhaps struggling with your relationship with food. You didn't adopt these behaviors overnight. So all the healing process of intuitive eating doesn't happen overnight. And it's very important to highlight that. Let's not rush it as well. And that's why Resh and Tripoli created the 10 principles of intuitive eating, which are meant to guide us through recognizing and rejecting diet culture. And of course, learning to cope with emotional eating, incorporating that gentle nutrition. And of course, there's more principles, and I'll show you all the principles in a minute within this presentation. So going back to who can try intuitive eating. So definitely it is something for everybody. Any human with a body can try intuitive eating. There are no qualifying factors or any prerequisites to fulfill in order to fit the intuitive eating bill. You don't have to have any issues with dieting or weight loss or struggle with various disordered eating habits. And if you do suffer from diagnosed eating disorder, working with an eating disorder dietitian or a psychotherapist, who of course are also trained in intuitive eating, can be very helpful. And if you have any food allergies, dietary restrictions, or medical conditions, they all can be honored and held within the intuitive eating framework. So definitely okay for any people who experience diabetes or any other conditions around their digestive system. It all can be obviously honored within intuitive eating framework. So as you can see on the screen, what are the benefits of intuitive eating? And we can see currently there's over 100 research studies and more ongoing that look at the benefits of intuitive eating. And positive health benefits with significant associations include, as you can see, lower total cholesterol, high self-esteem. It provides satisfaction from eating. It can be very much improving your body image, increases your well-being, and lowers rates, of course, of disordered eating and eating disorders. So it makes you a lot more free around food. It creates food freedom. However, it also kind of, allows you to divert from the way you look at your body because of kind of the lens of diet mentality. So it's allowing you to look at yourself and your eating from very much more holistic perspective. So why is it so popular? So let's begin with, I suppose, a brief description of what is diet mentality and diet culture. And I really like to kind of perhaps pose a question to you right now. What is for you, what it means actually for you, diet mentality? What does that mean? What's the diet culture for you? How do you feel it is defined? And perhaps if you want to drop it in the chat or in the Q&A box, wherever, kind of just to perhaps, write a sentence or two, what it is for you, or what it means for you to have diet mentality or be sort of embedded within diet culture. So I'm going to give you a second. If any of you who have access to a keyboard, you want to put that word or sentence into the chat box, because I'm really interested to see what are your opinions on it are. Okay.
It looks like the chat's disabled. I'm just working on not disabling it. I'm not sure why that's happened. So if people just pop it in the Q&A, that'd be helpful for now.
Lovely. Okay. So if you want to put it in the Q&A box, and let's see your answers, okay? So let's give it a moment. I can see the number of answers are coming up. Stevie, I wonder if you could read out, if you have a second, to just give me an answer of what are people saying in the chat box, the Q&A.
So it feels restrictive.
Yeah.
Somebody said diet culture, starving yourself, cutting out entire food groups like carbs.
Yeah.
Marion says always having to watch what you eat. Nicola said that for her it's counting sins and points and feeling guilty if you go over the sins or the points.
Yeah.
Douglas said self-defeating. And fitting the societal norm. That's really interesting. There's good and bad food, and it's all about restriction. And then appearance over health. Lots and lots of answers.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody, for the answers. And I think it's quite interesting to really think about, what it means for us to be sort of embedded within the diet culture and diet mentality. Bear with me. Apologies, something's coming up there. Can I just, I don't know if it's my issue here. Apologies.
Yeah.
Okay. That's just gone, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, apologies. There's some sort of great. So just to going back to the slide. So again, having a look at sort of, the food rules, and that's what diet mentality, diet culture is telling us. So there's food rules, avoiding foods too high in fats or carbs or calories, labeling foods, exercising for punishment. Food label gives you permission to eat certain things. Diet talk, feeling the need to justify your eating, and scale dictates happiness or worth. Of course, ignoring body cues, eliminating food groups and food guilt, equating thinness with health, complementing weight loss. And I think that's a kind of interesting one. And I can hear that with a lot of people sharing this with others, complementing that, where we don't know what exactly is happening for the person. Why are they kind of losing weight, or perhaps, putting weight on? We don't know that. And that is not connected with individual responsibility. Avoiding social situations because of food. And we hear that quite a lot. So it's worth to really think about, okay, well, what are the ways for us to fight diet culture? And I think this is kind of a really nice illustration of actually, the way we can fight diet culture is to focus on what our bodies can do rather than just punish them through exercise, because our bodies are designed to move, and we need to really allow them to move the way it feels comfortable for them. And of course, avoiding harmful forms of media, educating ourselves on the different types of health, because we know that obviously bigger bodies don't necessarily equal unhealthy bodies. So we can have quite a lot of bunch of people who might be living in a bigger body who are absolutely healthy. So that doesn't equal being unhealthy or less of a person. And again, of course, an important thing is to stop labeling food as good and bad. And I think it's kind of interesting that even if you have never been on a specific diet, it does not mean that you aren't very much tied up in the diet culture world. And it's easy to get lost in the system of beliefs, lost in the idea that thin equals healthy, that maybe weight loss grants you higher status in the world, that certain ways of eating are bad and others are good, and that it's okay to stigmatize those who don't match one picture of health. And this is a big issue within society. And it is still a hazard to very much recognize all the insidious ways that diet culture sneaks into our lives. So recently, we know that more research around the harms of dieting has been published, and intentional weight loss have very much reached the mainstream. So it's been shown that weight cycling, losing weight and gaining it back, has a higher risk of death than maintaining a higher weight. And those with an overweight BMI, and BMI, of course, is a different story for another time. Those people with higher BMI have their lowest risk of death and chronic disease across all BMIs. And research does show that weight stigma can actually cause more harm than simply being in a larger body. So why do we still diet? Why do we still covet thin bodies and stigmatize others? Of course, that's diet culture. Here is, I suppose, quite an important thing. Apart from the harm it causes, the bigger picture is, of course, diets don't work. You might say, hey, but somebody lost weight on a diet. And that is probably true. However, it's also probably true that they weren't able to keep the weight off. So did the diet actually really work? Of course not. And research overwhelmingly supports the fact that diets are not sustainable. Research also shows that 2/3 of dieters regain more weight than they lost on the diet. And any health benefits achieved in the short term are equally not long lasting. In fact, as noted above, and as I mentioned earlier, diets can actually cause negative health outcomes. And it's likely you've dieted before, maybe even tried a number of different diets. And as I mentioned earlier, it's also likely you've lost weight, but the diet was so difficult to sustain that you stopped following it. You gained weight back and maybe developed some disordered eating habits along the way. And after a little break, you thought maybe a little diet would be better or a different diet would be better. Then you start the process again. And this is called yo-yo dieting, in which we are consistently going on and off diets after resulting, often obviously afterwards, it is resulting in weight cycling. So regaining weight and losing weight over and over, which can be detrimental to both physical and mental health. So dieting also typically involves intense restrictions, often on both the amount we eat and the types of food you eat. So when we don't get enough calories, the brain releases a chemical called neuropeptide Y, NPY, which makes you crave carbohydrates. So after a period of restricting, our survival mechanism kicks in, triggering a binge. Clinically, a binge means eating in a discrete period of time an amount of food that is definitely larger than what most people would eat in a similar period of time under similar circumstances. And there's also typically a feeling of loss of control associated with it. And afterwards, you might feel extreme guilt and shame and tell yourself, I need to do better, which means restrict better the next day. And this is the binge restrict cycle, which many dieters and non-dieters struggle with. At this point, many feel they've hit diet rock bottom and can't take it anymore. And I guess this is where I come in with such a good news, because this is where intuitive eating comes into play. Intuitive eating is a solution to escape yo-yo dieting, weight cycling, and the binge restrict cycle. In fact, the first principle of intuitive eating is to reject diet culture. So to reject the idea that the next diet will be successful, and to reject that weight is the end all and be all of health. So intuitive eating is the counter to the damaging and stressful behaviors dieting demands. And instead, intuitive eating helps you get back to how you were born to eat, to listen to your body, to let go of external rules, and to find lasting peace with food. Okay? So here we are, 10 principles of intuitive eating. As mentioned before, Resch and Triboli created 10 guiding principles of intuitive eating. Each has its own chapter in their book. And I really would, again, if you want to have a Google of the book, make sure you reach out for the 4th edition of the book. But it is absolutely useful to have a look if you're interested in taking yourself on the journey of intuitive eating. So again, in their chapter, in each of the principles has its own chapter in the book and is equally important to the one before and after. So you don't follow them one by one, but you can relate to them. And I suppose the intention is that you would move through each principle, spending time to understand its importance in the journey and working to put it into practice. And there are no rules that you need to follow these principles in order, as I've mentioned. Intuitive eating is not a linear process, although gentle nutrition is intentionally the last principle, because if you haven't yet rejected diet culture or made peace with food, it will be hard not to turn gentle nutrition principles into another diet or set of rules. So just being mindful of it. So going back, okay, here I am. Reject diet mentality. So first principle. So as I've mentioned earlier, dieting and the drive to lose weight and the idea that thin is better are ingrained within us from a young age. How many diets have you tried? Have they worked? For how long? Did it make you feel happier inside or out? How long did this feeling last? Chances are they worked for a period of time before they stopped working. And diets are the problem, remember, not you. You did not fail your diet or fail to become a better person by not losing enough weight. Diets don't work, no matter how they are marketed to you. Work on rejecting the idea that dieting is the answer. Perhaps unfollow social media accounts that promote diets, weight loss, or very much that diet culture. Toss your diet-related cookbooks. Surround yourself with positive, weight-inclusive messaging about food and your body. Okay? Okay. I'm not sure what's coming up. Okay. Going to the number 2. So principle number 2, honor your hunger. In diet culture, being hungry is praised. The hungrier you are, the better, of course, you are, the more willpower you have. And this is such an unnatural way of being for every human being. Hunger is a biological process, and we need food to survive. Going back to a previous point, hunger is a key factor in the binge restrict cycle. The longer you restrict, the hungrier you become. Our bodies don't like being hungry, and eventually our primal instinct to survive will kick in, leading to intense cravings and an increased chance of binging and feeling out of control with food. In order to become more intuitive around food, you have to honor your hunger and all its nuances. Work on perhaps learning your body's hunger signs and feed it what it really needs. Number 3, make peace with food. So perhaps I often hear some clients say, I love ice cream, but I can't keep it in the house because I will eat the entire thing. In these cases, ice cream is viewed as a bad food that should be enjoyed sparingly. And the thing is, the more you tell yourself you can't eat a specific food, the more intensely you will want it. Apologies. Research shows that the pleasure centers in our brain actually light up more when introduced to a food that has been off limits. Cravings will increase until they hit a peak, and you do find yourself eating the entire pint or more. So learn to give yourself unconditional permission to eat. If you have ice cream anytime you want, the deprivation mindset is gone, and with it, the intense craving and the binging. Okay, I'm just going to find my mouse. Yeah, here I am. So then number 4, challenge the food police. So that's an interesting one. So diets love to label food as good and bad, which leads us to believe we personally are good or bad depending on what we eat. And the 4th principle of intuitive eating encourages you to say no to those unreasonable rules. Say no to the food police. Say no to the food police yelling at you that the food you're eating is bad and that you should feel guilt or shame for eating it. To really challenge it and allow yourself to perhaps neutralize food within your ability. Number 5, 5th principle, discover the satisfaction factor. So food is more than just fuel. So in order to feel truly full, you also need to feel satisfied. And this can only happen when you allow yourself to eat what you actually want. Think back to when you wanted pizza, perhaps, and then you were perhaps feeling like you cannot give yourself that, and you went back to the restaurant, and it kind of had some fish, for example, and you perhaps you enjoyed that, but again, then afterwards you were thinking, well, my mind was craving something else. So it's important to actually really satisfy what we really need. So if we don't satisfy our preferences, we will crave something quite quickly afterwards. So just being mindful of this satisfaction factor as well. Moving on to number 6, principle 6, feel your fullness. Just as you need to very much honor your hunger, you must also respect your fullness. Pay attention while eating any meal or snack, or ask yourself how you're feeling when you're eating something. Are you still hungry? Does your stomach feel full? You must be really familiar with the discomfort of being overly full. But there are many more nuances to fullness than that stuffed feeling. So learning hunger and fullness cues is very much that process. It will take time to tune into your body on this level, but it's worth just to understanding, okay, how does my body really feel when I'm eating? Does it feel full or is it uncomfortable? Let's understand that there is more than just 2 settings within my stomach. Number 7, so principle number 7 is cope with your emotions with kindness. First, it's important to really recognize that emotional eating is okay, and in fact, a normal coping response. It's also important to develop tools other than eating when emotions run high, so that food becomes one of many coping skills in your toolbox for you to choose from. You may also experience a lot of difficult emotions around food, but you can begin to work with those emotions by viewing them with kindness and self-compassion. If this feels like a foreign idea, explore what self-compassion is and try and practice it, just so you understand how your triggers work. So you have, I suppose, you learn what sort of other ideas you can implement into your toolbox and work with that. And number 8, which is principle number 8, respect your body. So every human body, of course, is different. And even if we all ate and exercised in the same way, they would still be different. And going back to the 2 dietitians, Resch and Tripoli, they use this wonderful analogy. If you are shoe size 8, it would be impossible and super uncomfortable to squeeze into a size 5. The same goes for your body. All bodies deserve equal respect and dignity, not criticism and contempt. You don't have to love your body, but respecting it is so much different. It means showing up for your body, taking care of it, and treating it with kindness amongst all. So going to the next principle, which is joyful movement and feeling the difference. So as exercise, and I'm sure you've noticed that, is so frequently looked at by diet culture, and is also often overlooked when it comes to disorder eating or very much eating disorders. Movement is beneficial for all our physical and mental health, but overexercise can be quite dangerous. So perhaps allow yourself to shift your focus from burning calories to how it feels to move. Choose exercise that makes you feel good, happy and energized, positive, or even relaxed. Maybe some stretching, for example, or yoga, whatever else kind of feels good to you. So if something does feel bad, don't do it. Exercise because you enjoy it, not because you want to shrink your body. And moving on to 10. So again, one of the misconceptions about intuitive eating is that you will just eat whatever you want, whenever you want. Principle 10 debunks this theory. Nutrition is an essential part of intuitive eating and overall health. Gentle nutrition is about making choices that will promote health and honor what will make you feel best, mentally as well as physically. So including fruits and vegetables every day is beneficial, but not having them at one meal or day or even week will not make or break your health. With this principle of intuitive eating, we're taking a flexible approach to nutrition. And again, one that perhaps emphasizes balance and variety. Nutrition is not about the rigid rules or numbers. And what I will present to you now is the kind of common misconceptions of intuitive eating, so myths and misconceptions. So starting with the first one. So intuitive eating means eating pizza and sweets all the time. So if you were to read Principle 3, unconditional permission to eat, without diving deeper, this might be the assumption you would make. And while you might eat more pizza or more sweets or whatever it is that you really crave, in the beginning of your intuitive eating journey, this honeymoon phase will not last forever. In fact, the more you allow yourself to enjoy a certain food, the less your brain will desire it. The food is no longer scarce, a novelty, or off limits. So if you know you can have that food whenever you want, the craving will be less frequent or intense, and even more, you will be less likely to feel out of control around that food when you do have it. So when you're able to listen to what your body wants and learn what makes your body feel best, you might find yourself reaching for more nutrient-dense options. And again, the second one, which is intuitive eating, is just about hunger and fullness. So again, listening to hunger and fullness cues are just 2 of the 10 principles of intuitive eating. They're one part of the larger whole. Following a diet strictly based on hunger and fullness cues is exactly that, a diet. Once you apply black and white rules to what and when you eat, diet culture is back in the picture. Hunger and fullness cues are extremely nuanced and fall on a spectrum. Listen to those cues does not mean only eating when they are abundantly clear. In fact, there are many times it makes sense to eat when you are not hungry and when you're or when full. Okay, so intuitive eating results in weight loss. You might lose weight, you might stay the same weight, you might gain weight. Focusing on weight loss while practicing intuitive eating is, well, intuitive. So interoceptive awareness, which is understanding and listening to the body's internal cues, becomes less possible if you're still thinking about external cues. For example, calories and the number on the scale. It also makes finding a peaceful relationship with food difficult, as there will likely still be foods you restrict because you fear they will make you gain weight. Can you still want to lose weight and practice intuitive eating? Of course you can. But it's important to understand how it might undermine your intuitive eating efforts, but the why behind the goal, as well as put more taught into markers of success that don't involve the scale. So really thinking about how you want to measure your success here without involving the scales. A lot of proponents of intuitive eating commonly practice from health at every size paradigm, so HAES, which promotes size acceptance, body diversity, and of course respect, and that all bodies should have equal access to healthcare. There's so much more to say, of course, on the topic of HAES, but I would urge you to have a look at research health at every size for yourself and see if anything of the movement of the HAES community is something that you resonate with. And I think there's a lot we can learn from that movement around how we view our bodies, how we view also our eating. Moving on to the fourth misconception, that intuitive eating is the same thing as mindful eating. And I think it's kind of something I also use quite a lot in my own practice. So while we know that they do both share perhaps a lot of similarities, mindful eating encompasses only one small part of intuitive eating. And mindful eating does involve very much that satisfaction, nourishment, and hunger cues, but it's generally marked and practiced as a strategy for weight loss. And with the recommendations like, for example, be mindful around how you eat, how many times you chew, eat small bites, and choose modest portions, mindful eating quickly gets tied up in diet culture. However, we need to be very mindful how we use that. So it definitely can skip over important intuitive eating principles discussed earlier, such as rejecting the diet mentality and respecting your body, joyful movement, gentle nutrition, and emotional eating. So practicing mindfulness is an essential tool in intuitive eating, but is not the only thing that intuitive eating represents. And the last misconception, which is intuitive eating is anti-health. There is a difference between not focusing on weight loss as a goal and being anti-health. Health is absolutely the goal with intuitive eating, but it looks at health from a broader scope. Mental health is so often overlooked, but is intertwined with physical health. To focus on physical health without looking at our emotional and psychological health can be like taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back over and over again. So intuitive eating does not ignore nutrition, definitely refer to Principle 10. It takes the whole self into account and encourages health-promoting behaviors that do not only center around what we eat. So just to summarize, just bear with me. Intuitive eating is about trusting your inner body wisdom to make choices around food that feel really good in your body without judgment and without influence from diet culture. And we are all born with the skill to eat, to stop when we're full, to eat when we are hungry, and to eat satisfying foods. So as we grow up, that can change for a variety of reasons. And many of us lose that freedom, and intuitive eating is learning to reclaim it. When we filter out the noise and the influence that diet culture presents to us as a false truth, we can then truly listen to what our body wants and needs from food. And intuitive eating is a peace movement. It's ending the war with your body, learning to accept our diverse genetic blueprint. Diet culture would have us believe all the rules we have around food and that anybody other than a thin one is wrong. So those food rules lead to an emotional value we place on food. And when we put that emotional value on food, we then internalize it as we eat. And of course, that can lead us to thoughts like, I'm so bad because I ate X, Y, and Z. So just to, I suppose, let me be quite clear. Food is not good and bad, and labeling it as such can pose many problems. Nutritionally, just like bodies, all foods are different. Emotionally, though, all foods must be equal. One food does not make you bad, while the others make you good. If we can approach all foods as emotionally equal, we can truly begin to connect with our own inner wisdom. Intuitive eating is about making peace with food and giving up the needless war against our body and how we eat. So, intuitive eating is challenging and it can be really difficult to understand. It's completely opposite of how we have been taught to think about food. And it's not black and white, it's gray, nuanced. And there is no one right way, which is why it can be so confusing. So, intuitive eating can be a beautiful part of recovery. It is also an essential piece in the prevention of eating disorders. If you are struggling to understand what very much I was talking about today, or what is intuitive eating, I suggest you have a look at the book by Triboli and Resch, and perhaps reach out to the Health at Every Size community to gather more information. But for now, I'd like to thank you for listening to this presentation, and I welcome any questions you might have, because I know it is a confusing topic, but I hope it kind of taught you a little bit about what this is all about. Okay?
Thanks, Milena. That was really brilliant. There's quite a few questions actually, so I think I'll just start at the beginning and send them your way. So Holly sent a question in. It was mentioned that a bigger body can be healthy, but according to the NHS, a BMI over 25 is not healthy. So which two of these pieces of information should we be following?
And I think this is kind of supposed for you to understand that there is not anything really is black and white. And I think there is a lot of research out there that you can see and reach out for that is showing us that not everybody that is bigger is unhealthy. And I think sometimes diving into that can actually help you to understand yourself, because a lot of the time we hear the rhetoric around from medical professionals that we do need to lose weight for health. But sometimes it's good to also challenge it and question it. What does that mean? So I think it might be worth for you to take yourself on this journey to discover different perceptions of health. And I think it's an interesting one, really reassuring journey.
There's a few people asking where they can get the book and what the book is called.
Yeah, so the book is called Intuitive Eating by two of the two dietitians. So what I could do, I can put it in the chat in a second. Can I actually put it somewhere, Stevie?
You can pop it in the chat. I think it's just disabled for attendees.
That's okay. That's okay. Perhaps it's something for all of you to kind of take responsibility on and have a Google of intuitive eating and come up with the book is really highly available, and usually it is something, if you Google intuitive eating, it comes up very easily, and it has to be by Resch and Triboli. Any other ones I would not recommend that easily. Okay.
Thanks, Lorna. So Douglas has asked, when you've lived with diet culture for 60 years and this continues to be a societal norm, how do you reject diet mentality and regain a normal relationship with food?
I think it's more really asking yourself really kind of how diet mentality has affected you, what kind of really taught you to believe in, and perhaps reach out to kind of to speak about sort of what we kind of showed it earlier in the slides. I'm going to go back to one of the slides actually. Sort of looking at sort of something that is telling you that there's food rules, or that you have been labeling food as good and bad. Of course, there's not such thing as bad food. So again, learning around sort of what do I understand about diet mentality, and don't rush the process either, because it does take a while. Again, over your whole lifetime you've been learning about what it means and, following certain things. So it's going to be quite a while until you unlearn that. I also would kind of recommend speaking to a professional, whether it's a psychotherapist, whether it's someone who has been trained in intuitive eating, and of course all our ABL Health staff are aware, and you can speak to, if you're one of our clients, do talk to one of our coaches and get that information, and maybe just challenge it with yourself as well. Okay.
Thanks, Milena. So this is quite an interesting question from Holly. Will we be given a weight loss goal during the weight management program? And if so, how does this align with intuitive eating?
Mm-hmm. I wonder as well, because a lot of the time there's obviously different weight management programs, and I think I can only speak for what we do in our program, which is looking at your own preference, your own body, your own abilities, rather than kind of perhaps, putting that certain, pressure on what you need to be doing. It is your journey, and it's so individual. And again, if you feel like, there's an external pressure to lose weight, do challenge it. Where is that coming from? Who's setting this up? You don't have to listen to everything everybody else says, unless, of course, it is something that kind of perhaps it's very much crucial to your health. I don't know if Stevie, you wanted to add maybe anything to this question.
Sorry, I've looked away from that question and been reading different ones. Can you remember the question to ask it to me again?
Yeah. So
it's about setting weight loss goals, wasn't it? Sorry.
Yeah.
So it depends on your journey in the service. So I'm a lifestyle coach, and I look after lots of clients that are on the bariatric pathway. So are looking to go and have bariatric surgery. So for that reason, we do have to set a weight loss goal, and that's because of the way you get the funding to have bariatric surgery. But if you come onto our weight loss service and are just looking for some support to become healthier, our staff very much come at this from a point of helping you to be well as a whole person. And for me, but in particular, it doesn't matter about the number on the scales as long as you feel better at the end of your intervention with us. So some people feel motivated by a weight loss target, and there is one available if you want one, but we don't push that on you, and you don't have to look at that all the time. I think I've done my job, and the rest of the team have done their job when you feel better at the end of your time with us.
And not necessarily always weight has to be the goal. It could be health promoting behavior. So if you find feeling like you want to work on your movement, or learning to kind of introduce more food, or kind of stop labeling food, that can be your goal as well. So it's not always all around such, you need to lose that weight.
There's another question from Lisa. So it says, if you struggle being aware of your hunger signs until you begin eating, is there any way that you can suggest to help relearn those kind of hunger fullness cues?
Yeah, a lot of the time, kind of our hunger and fullness is very much influenced by our mental health and how our body sort of, is in the moment. A lot of the time, anxiety or any sort of stresses can impact sort of, let's say, poor appetite. So that's usually what we would kind of see in ourselves. When we're anxious, we don't want to eat. And when we are sad or a lot more maybe depressed, we want to eat a little bit more. So going back to perhaps, thinking about your own history of eating. Have you been sort of believing in something? If you have been on different diets in the past, for example, you're more likely to really struggle also with hunger and fullness. But it is possible to sort of rediscover that sensation within your body. And sometimes it's kind of starting from eating regularly, and teaching your body again that there is food safety, that you need to follow a bit of a routine for yourself. Because if we don't eat regularly, our body does not have a chance to show us that it's hungry or is struggling with certain things. So have a think about, how you're implementing your routine around eating, and make sure you also pay attention to what happens for you. Maybe pause in the middle of the meal and really kind of think about, okay, how does my body feel right now? I hope that answers a little bit.
from a practical sense, and Milena, I'm not sure if this fits completely with this, but there's a tool that we use in our service called the Hunger Fullness Scale. And it's something that we would ask people to just look at the numbers on the scale before they eat and see where they think they are. And after you've eaten, give yourself about 20 minutes for your food to settle, and then look again and see where you think you are on that scale. And it just helps you to start to recognise in terms of what you've eaten, how hungry you were before, and how full you are afterwards. And I think that's maybe a good place to start, but I don't know if it aligns completely with this method, Milena.
It can be useful as, again, there's a lot of different ways, and I think Triboli and Resch cover a lot around sort of hunger and fullness, and this is such an individual sort of way of rediscovering it. And I do believe the hunger scale is a really good tool to kind of implement, to look away and understand where you're at. And I think I do use that within my own practice as well. So you're welcome to try it and have a Google of it, or if you really need to see what hunger scale looks like, if you're one of our clients, you're welcome to give us a shout and we'll be able to share it with you.
Thanks, Milena. So a really interesting question. How do we apply this to children? How do we teach this in schools?
I think it's a kind of interesting question. I think I like that because there is a lot more curiosity, I think, around sort of, how we go back to the basics with kids. Because a lot of the time our kids are influenced by how we eat, what sort of mentality around food we have. So if we pass this on to kids, of course there's going to be issues. So I think it's kind of going back to kind of showing kids or very much children or young people that sort of opening that curiosity around foods, that there's no such thing as bad food, that we can learn to eat mindfully, that there is different texture to explore, but also being mindful of how we present food with this, the part of kind of how people associate or have that kind of psychological associations towards food. And just kind of making sure that we are quite clear that there's no such thing as foods that has a kind of any emotional value. That if we eat bad food, that means that we are bad. So we need to kind of teach people and young kids as well that there is that neutrality around it. But it would be really interesting to see that on a lot of programs. I'm not quite sure exactly if there is anything implemented in schools across the country. I hope there is. I know that Health at Every Size movement and community has been doing a lot of work with that, to maybe something for you to research. I hope there is, and let us know if there is.
Thanks, Lana. I think we've got time for a couple more questions. So Faye has asked, how often should I eat, and should I only eat 3 times a day?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, isn't it, to think about, what is it that you really need? You're the expert. You are the person who knows your body, and really remembering, what's too little, what's too much for you, what kind of feels comfortable in terms of, your kind of the number of meals. Because if I was to tell you exactly this is how many meals you've got to eat, that's coming from the diet mentality. Yes, there is a lot of advice coming from the dietitians around how many meals, but kind of staying within the intuitive eating framework, it is about you listening to your body.
Thanks, Milena. So there's a question here that says, what's the best way to start this journey?
Okay. What do you think? I think it might be probably through learning about it, maybe having a read through the book. There is also Triboli and Resch have a workbook that you can start with. Again, there is a lot of different professionals as well out there who talk about intuitive eating. Social media, I follow Intuitive Eating Ireland, who have amazing resources on social media and talk about their professionals who kind of started an amazing movement around intuitive eating. and they are trying to link up with more organizations in the UK to kind of create a community of different professionals like psychotherapists, counselors who sit under obviously kind of those professionals who are accredited, who you can trust. But I'm sure there's other nutritionists, dietitians in this country that you can see and revisit and maybe have a chat around that. But again, the book by Resch and Tribole is the Bible of intuitive eating, and that's a good start.
Perfect. Thanks, Melanie. I think that's all the questions we've got time for today. So you'll notice that I've popped the poll up just for you to see how you've found the session today and whether you feel that your knowledge around intuitive eating has improved from the beginning to now. So if you could answer that, that would be really helpful. There's been a few questions asking about sessions in the future. So I know that the next webinar that will be on is going to be Intuitive Eating Part 2, and that's going to be delivered by one of our nutritionists, Jessica, and she'll come at this from a nutritionist point of view, and I think she might tackle some of the kind of day-to-day challenges you might face and kind of come at it from a practical point of view. But we'll get that out as soon as possible. And I think the date for that session is Thursday, the 18th of August. So if you look out on our socials for the registration link, you'll be able to sign up there. But thank you very much, everybody, for attending. And thanks, Milena, for an amazing webinar. That's fantastic. And I think we'll leave you there. And I hope everybody's not too hot and can be nice and cool. And we'll see you at the next one. Thanks, Milena.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.